time for everything under the sun, a time for war, a time for peace, a time for, now one of them is actually dying. We have probably had experience of people either linked with us or linked with people linked with us who have died unexpectedly, and in the course of an ordinary journey have found themselves at a journey's end that they hadn't expected. And then people ask questions. Just the other day, my brother contacted me saying that his father-in-law had passed away quietly in his sleep. But I had felt a nudge to go and see him just not long before then, and travelled over, and because he was Polish, I anointed him and he was fully lucid. And I reminded him, you had a second life. Being Polish, he was involved in the war, but actually already, in fact, he was in the army because he'd chosen to be in the army when the war broke out, quite independently of war, and therefore he was an officer on the way up. And he'd been wounded, and therefore he was hospitalized urgently. And then these troops came in asking whether there were any officers present. And he started to lift up his wounded arm to say that he was an officer, but the nurse stopped him and protested to those who wanted officers, no, don't take any notice, he's out of his mind, he's in pain, he's delirious, he doesn't know what he's saying. They left him in peace. Those who were officers were put in wagons, one by one, and by the wagon, all taken up hundreds of kilometers up to a certain part of Russia, and shot one after the other in the back of the head and put in huge ditches. It was all the head of the Polish army, 10,000 officers, thus making sure for Stalin that there would be no resistance from authority in Poland. He owed his second life to that hidden nurse who intuited what was about to happen more than he did. And so, eventually, he was able to marry, and from there came the family that my brother is married into. A good man. And in fact, when my brother's mother-in-law, who was still alive, got to know him, the person who knew Casimir said to her, she was 24, if you can make do with a little, he'll be good for you. And so he was. And so, a happy marriage rather than a bullet. And he appreciated it. He appreciated every meal that came to him because he knew what starvation meant from being a prisoner of war. Just that he wouldn't eat one thing, the only thing they were given to eat, because of the memories attached to it. Time then, a time to be born and a time to die. You here are all young, even the parents, and then all down the conveyor belt you are different degrees of being young. We don't know how much time we have, but we don't have all that much when it comes to looking at time as a whole. At the most, a century, at the very most. we can make good use of it or indifferent use of it. Today is the feast day of somebody who made use of every moment, actually sometimes twice over, because he could be in more than one place at the same time sometimes. It's Padre Pio. There he is, looking at you in that big statue. And one day they saw that he was freezing cold as he lay on his bed, so they kept covering him with blankets, and he was still freezing cold. It was bizarre because it wasn't that cold in the room. Eventually it turned out that he was actually somewhere else. Even though his body was there, he was on the top of a mountain, hearing the confession of people who are dying on the top of the mountain by location. He had a great contact with the holy souls, and he was known to have muttered one time, "If you only knew the number of souls who are pulling at my chasuble," at the altar. He also had a great link with the invisible world of the angels. People could send their guardian angel to him. By the way, that is something that we can also do if we cultivate our friendship with our angel, who's always there. He will do things for us, help us to find lost objects or even lost people, like Daddy and Mammy in a crowd. They know and they can see, and they can also nudge and protect us. One time, he had to come from hearing confessions or from making thanksgiving in church via the crowd and come back to his cell, and that was a dangerous moment, because if he was left to himself, the pious women in Italy would have little scissors with them, and they'd start chopping away at his habit all the time to have a precious relic. And so the consequences were a bit tiresome. And so he had to have a bodyguard, essentially for Alessio, his faithful companion, nurse or whatever, one of the brethren, a priest. But he had to come at the right time when he was about to come out of church. And it would be in the night. So Fer Alessio would, after seeing that he was okay at the altar, wherever he was, he would go back to bed for a while. But then he found that he was being suddenly woken unexpectedly at a certain time, and eventually Padre Pio had to correct him gently and say, "You must get a new alarm clock. I am tired of sending my guardian angel to get you." This then was the awareness that he had of the invisible world. Some years ago, I was, way before he was made saint, celebrating in the parish for somebody's intention, and the intention had been in memory or in honor or whatever of Padre Pio. And so, as I came near the parish church in Italy, this gentleman hobbled along and said, "I had known Padre Pio." And he said that there were two friends, young men, before the outbreak of war, and they had both gone to see him at the same time. And Padre Pio had said to the one that was before me, "You will come back." To the other, "You won't." And so it was. One day, this is far more recent in time, I was blessing the houses in the area where I go back every year to Italy, and I got to the house of very good Catholics who came every day to church. You'd see them there in the early celebration, lovely couple. They weren't old at all, but they were very much into prayer and aware of things, and I saw on the wall a picture of him when he was making his first communion. And he said there's a story behind that. And he told me the story. I had been sent to Padre Pio to make my confession. And there he was, in his shorts, but ready to meet the holy man. And it was his turn, and eventually, when it was about to happen that he was going to, after a long wait to go to make his confession, they came out and announced it was the end of confessions for that time. So he started again. He was ready for another queue the following day. And immediately Padre Pio appeared out of nowhere, made a beeline for him and said, not knowing officially what had happened the previous day, "Good man, you had a long wait the previous day, you must go before this little girl and I will heal you straight away." So he was fully aware, inside his box, what was happening outside. And so on it would go. And I'd hear also testimonies from people on a regular basis out there in Italy of things that he would be doing after his death. One time a friend of mine came to me and he was involved in a huge motorway accident at a colossal speed, and the car was just, I saw the picture I think of the car, devastated, and he miraculously came out unscathed, and also came out with him the one thing that he had visible in the car, an image of Padre Pio. I heard almost exactly the same testimony from someone else living close to the Abbey, and also other things where he would actually appear to people. So if you want a friend in heaven, as well as your guardian angel, remember Padre Pio. He's one of the most powerful intercessors of all time. And he's close to us in time. One day he had a friend who had compassion on his pain and wanted to take some of it on himself. He asked permission if he could, and Padre Pio was trying to warn him, but he insisted, so he allowed a portion. Immediately he started to feel such terrible, terrible suffering and pain, atrocious, so atrocious that he couldn't bear it anymore, and had to back off and go back to him. So Padre Pio made him understand what being a victim meant. So I finish with that, because that's what he was. And they say that it is victim souls who hold up the world. We can't see it, but there's a huge battle going on over the globe. The powers of evil against the powers of good. And we don't know what would happen if it weren't for people who held up the balance between good and evil. If they're not there, it tips the other way. And it seems that what happens then is that we all have to take it together. So, watch this space. Who knows what will happen next year, 100 years after Fatima? We just don't know, do we? There seems to be a pattern in history. If things go that much that way against God, then they have to come back. So,